Hail, and welcome back to Elder Futhark Rune Divination 101. Today we will be discussing the rune Isa, also known as the Ice Rune. It is the third rune in the second eight. And I have no further messages for you today, so let's get started right away. The meaning of the rune Isa is, as I said, ice. Therefore, it represents stagnation. It represents lack of movement. It represents being stuck in a certain place. It sometimes also represents a lack of emotion. But at the same time, because frozen water is ice. Therefore, ice Isa can also represent a bridge across water in the sense that you can traverse a otherwise insurmountable obstacle. The literal translation for Isa is ice. The modern day letter equivalent to Isa would be I, as in sit, wit, or fit. Its associated astronomical body is the moon of planet Earth in particular. Its associated element is obviously ice and therefore also water. Its associated goddess is Verdandi, or the Norn of the present, the now, or the Norn of becoming, as she is sometimes also known, because everything in the present is happening. It is shaping the past. It is also shaping the future, so therefore becoming. Now, ice, depending on the circumstances, can be either one of the most enjoyable or one of the most miserable things you can encounter. Obviously, it can provide fun in the form of being able to do ice skating. It can represent, like I said earlier, a bridge across water. That body of water could normally not be traversable through other means, other than perhaps possessing a boat, but not everybody has the capability to make one, to build one or purchase one, I should say. When water is frozen over and it is solid enough to cross, you can obviously use the ice as a means of traversing, preferably by having some skates or whatever. But yeah. So the point is, it can be a positive thing, but it can also be a negative thing. It can be a huge hazard in the sense that, when something is frozen, when something is covered in ice, it will make it harder to walk on or to drive on or whatever you're doing. Travel on an icy road is never pleasant. It will always be a hazard. It can result in injuries, accidents, broken bones, that sort of thing. So always caution is advised when one encounters ice for obvious reasons. The danger of slipping, falling down, that sort of thing. Crashing your car even. So all these things, they are two sides of the same coin that is represented by ice. Which is also going to be, setting the mood for what this rune means in divination. Isa is a nice representation of, traveling on an icy road, because it is dangerous to do so, and to, force movement, to speed up, to, basically try to exert yourself too much. It is a very dangerous thing, and it is ill-advised. Preferably if, a winter sets in its fullest and everything is covered in snow, everything is covered in ice. Obviously these days we have, salted roads and all that stuff, but back in the day it would have been way more advisable to just, stay at home and to delay travel until the weather just lets up and, the sun breaks through and starts shining and melts everything. So, it is a very symbolic rune. It is also a very powerful rune, like every rune is. By its very nature, it blocks movement. Water is often in motion, but ice represents the stillness of motion, or the lack of motion, I should say. Therefore, it also means that any and all plans that we have, any and all productivity that we might be hoping for, it's very likely to be delayed because Isa is a delaying rune. It is never a rune that signifies, if you stay on your current path, that something will fail necessarily. It is a rune that shows us that we are not doomed in our efforts in that sense. It is a rune that merely shows that we must be patient, that we must, bide our time, if you will. It calls for awareness of your position, for awareness of your surroundings. What should I do? What should I not do? Should I force this movement? Should I wait? When Isa appears, forcing movement is always ill-advised. That's the entire nature of the rune. It basically calls for prudence, it calls for diligence in your actions. Inaction, in other words, when you encounter Isa, is the best course of action. So no action is the best action. And if any action is advised at all, it would usually be preparation rather than actually going ahead with what you're planning. So on a emotional and mental level, Isa represents the decaying, the cooling off of emotions, of passions, a loss of interest in a given thing for whatever reason. Basically that means that, for example, in love life, someone is in the beginning very interested in you, and a few weeks down the line, once you get to know each other a little better, they suddenly stop messaging you as much, or they stop interacting with you, stop talking to you. In that case, that is a representation of Isa on an emotional level. It is, in that sense, just a cooling off, the ice rune, basically. It is the freezing over of emotions, of affection, of those kinds of things. However, that said, not all is bleak with this rune, as I said in the beginning. It can also be a preserving rune, because obviously, as we know, freezing things, like, you put your produce in the freezer and it will not rot, it will not spoil. So Isa can also represent a preservation kind of deal, saving something for a later date when the timing is better suited for it. So that is the positive thing, the positive aspect of Isa, when we're talking about having patience, when we're talking about delays, when we're talking about inaction. It is a sign, on the other hand, also when we're talking about emotional things, that feelings should not remain unexpressed. Like I said, it represents falling off, it represents the cooling off of emotion. And when Isa shows up in such situations, it might actually be a good idea to, express feelings towards the person whose emotion is actually starting to cool off, so as to thaw such emotions again. Basically make that person feel a bit more warm towards you once more, as opposed to their current state, their current direction of, their emotions freezing over. So Isa is a rune that, while it seemingly is very simple, it requires a lot of interpretation on the part of the one that is doing the reading. And it is a very intuitive rune, therefore. It can be a warning that, an undesirable effect on the situation might occur if you choose to force movement, if you choose to, go ahead with plans. It might simply be that if you force movement, that you will just, shatter the ice altogether. And that would be a bad thing, right? I mean, you don't want to go ahead and break things if you're, trying to carefully plan for them, carefully try to, get the best result from a specific situation that you're trying to, I hesitate to use the word, but if you're trying to quote-unquote manipulate a certain situation so that it happens in your favor, diligence and prudence is called for. You need to be very careful, because if you rush too far ahead, it's just going to break things altogether, and that might be beyond recognition, beyond repair. And that is obviously something you want to avoid if you're willing to go to an extent that you're carefully planning things around it. So, basically, in short, Isa is a rune that calls for patience, it calls for prudence, it calls for diligence, it calls for inaction, it calls for, at the same time, in emotional aspects, perhaps more action to thaw the freezing of emotions. That said, Isa, due to its shape, it's just a single line. It has no reverse, so there will be no reverse to this rune video, just the upright and the converse. Isa upright. The meaning of Isa upright in divination, it signifies that a time of inaction has happened, is called for, or is about to happen, or is currently happening. So, that's the main characteristic if you see an upright Isa in your rune reading. Or I should say that in action, or at the very least, very careful movement. When it shows up in your divination spread, it should never, you should never force anything, you should never rush into anything, you should always carefully and patiently act. You should not act impatiently without deliberation or wisdom. Like I said in the general description and meanings of Isa, if you ignore that warning, you will shatter the ice. It will not have positive effects, and that may range from a minor mishap to a complete and utter disaster. So it is always, just very simply put, better for you to just sit down and think about things before you do it. It is a delaying rune. It tends to have a delaying influence regardless of the situation that the querent is inquiring about. If Isa shows up in the past, by the way, it might indicate that the person has had to deal with a lot of delays of plans, of a situation being stuck in some way, shape, or form, and that the person is currently dealing with the aftermath of these events. It might simply be that while it is no longer the case that the situation is stuck, it might simply be that the situation is speeding up, but it is still slow. It's still it's not slow. It's not very quick to come to fruition, basically. It's there for a reason in the spread. So if it shows up in the past, that delaying time period, that period of inaction, has a direct or indirect connection to whatever it is that the querent is currently asking about. It will be evident from the rest of the runes in the reading and the story that the querent has, usually at least, the kinds of effects that Isa had in the past. It will be quite obvious usually what it was that they were dealing with and how it resulted in their current predicament. Still continuing on with the past, if Isa shows up in the past, that is not necessarily an indication that, as I said, the querent can now rush into things. It can still signify that there is still a matter of, delay, of prudence being called for, still caution being called for, but that a time of waiting is ending currently, and that the client should do their best, or the querent, I should say, should do their best to, get everything ready so that they can move in the right or desired direction when the situation finally starts up or starts happening, starts occurring, and the old situation is finally the old situation of staying inactive is finally coming to an end. Isa upright is always a signifier that with caution, with patience, that everything will turn out all right. It is a rune that basically says to you in any slot of the divination, like if you wait, if you are patient, if you do not rush into things, you will find that everything is going to be fine as long as you properly prepare for it, as long as you don't rush into things. The blockages on the current path will be cleared up, the ice will melt, the water will start flowing again. Usually, Isa in and of itself, a situation is basically best handled by not handling it at all, or to the bare minimum. Isa could mean that a situation that you have put a lot of work in, that it might be called for to just, give it a rest, let things go their course. Things happen as they happen, no more input on your part is required or called for. In fact, to do so is, once again, going to be damaging, it's going to be harmful. So basically, what you need to do, or what the querent needs to do, is just sit there, you have done your part, you've done everything you could, everything you needed, and just let things run their course. The only thing you basically would do in such a situation is, on your part, you make preparations, everything is in its place, and you're ready to move when the time comes. And like I said, if it is about emotional affairs, it might indicate, depending on your intuition, and this is very important, it's not always a given that this is what it means in emotional, in dealings with emotion. It might mean the former meaning that we have just discussed, of just giving things a rest, of letting it go their own course for now. But it could also alternatively mean, as I said in the beginning, that you need to thaw out certain frozen over aspects, certain frozen over emotions in particular. Such as the love of a family member, of a friend, of a spouse, or a potential partner. These things are a bit tricky, and you should always look to surrounding runes and to your own intuition, and depending on the context of the question that is being asked, interpret it in such a way, because there is a risk of misinterpreting this, obviously, if you're speaking on one hand about no movement, and on the other hand making mild movements, because that is always the case with Isa. Never should you force things, but if it comes to having to express emotions, do so in a calm, collected manner to thaw out the emotion that is being frozen over. So an example of upright Isa, in a rune reading. It might be when someone is inquiring about moving, for example. It might show up in this case as the challenge rune. It would indicate that the person would be eager to move because they're asking you about moving. It might not be a good time to move in this present situation for whatever reason. There might be factors that the individual is overlooking. Perhaps finances are just not in order as much as the client thinks. There might be, hidden financial burdens hiding under the grass. Arrangements that have to be properly, made, that might take time, that might consume time and money that is currently not yet available. It could even mean that the house that the individual is inquiring about buying or renting might have, a lot of appeal to the querent, but there might be hidden shortcomings to the house that are not obvious on the surface. This in and of itself does not have to mean that the one selling or renting out the house knows about this. It could even mean that that person doesn't know it either, and that's just like a shortcoming that down the line is going to require even more money to fix, and that will just not be beneficial to you. It will just drain your funds even more. So these kinds of things. It could just mean that for whatever reason, in this particular reading, it is just not a very good time to proceed with moving. In that case, Isa would simply mean, wait, let things sort themselves out, continue looking. That is your preparation, but don't move yet, because for whatever reason, it's just not a good time to move. So, in a spiritual context, upright Isa to me, it represents patience most of all. It represents the time we spend, sitting on our backsides, wanting and waiting for something good to happen, or at least for something in general to happen. And, being unable to directly influence or even indirectly influence the situation. It can represent the answers that we want to get on our spiritual paths if we have the questions about, what do I believe? What should I believe? How should I act? And basically these answers just won't seem to come for whatever reason. The solution that you're looking for isn't presenting itself. It is the irritating inability to make headway on your path because you're at the mercy of outside factors, for example. It is the stagnation of plans, of ideas, of creativity. It is the loss or the lack of emotions and feelings towards something that we might have or might not have. It is not so much about being lost as I would interpret other runes in that context. It is simply about knowing where to go, knowing how you want to get there, but for some reason the how isn't quite working out for you. It might be that you might have to, sit it out, basically. Isa can also, imply a lack of growth on your spiritual path, because maybe you're not feeling motivated or capable of advancing in your spiritual practices, in your magical undertakings, or, something along those lines. It can simply mean that, you're just wanting things to move too quickly. It might be that right now you should just, continue your spiritual practices as they are, put them on the back burner a little bit, and, engage the physical world more. Engage mental things, such as like gaining knowledge on whatever things, something that is unrelated to spirituality. Just put it on the back burner, focus on other things, and the solution will present itself in time when it needs to happen, or when you are ready for it, or when the other person or persons involved are ready for it. This might also be a cautionary rune that we might be focusing too much on certain things, certain aspects in our lives. It might be saying, hold down, hold up, slow down, take some time off. The current that is normally running is being frozen right now. It's frozen over. You can't really move in this direction, and you shouldn't try, because the consequences aren't going to be very pleasant, or it's just not going to yield any kind of result at all. And focus on something else. Just go do something else, basically. So, we come to Isa Converse. And the meaning of Isa Converse in a rune reading, it is a specifically a warning against hidden meanings of things, against hidden consequences of things. But unlike other runes that we have discussed so far, like Converse Hagalas, Converse Wunyo, and other runes that we will be discussing that have a similar context in their converse meaning, like manas. Um, Isa is specifically about hidden intentions of people, hidden consequences of particular situations, more so than those other runes in the converse meaning. It has a tendency to signify someone's emotions not appearing to be what they are. It might imply, for example, that a seemingly friendly person is not so very friendly in their intentions towards you as they might appear on the surface. Like smiling in your face and then backstabbing you as soon as you turn your back. Um, and we're talking specific malicious intent here. Someone who is actively, out to exploit you. About deceiving, about being deceived, and that is, of course, up to you and your intuition. Whether it is about the querent themselves deceiving or about them being deceived. So that is up to you. It could also, on the other hand, imply that someone who appears to be cold and distant, that is actually just a front. That they deep down have a whole well of emotions that is boiling over, as it were. And on the surface, they just seem disinterested. They seem calm. They seem just to not care. They seem cold. But they might either have very positive feelings towards you, but they don't dare to tell you anything because they might be ashamed of it, or it could be that they have malicious intent towards you, but that they're just not saying it to your face, or just not willing to show it, or that for whatever reason they might be scared of you and they just don't dare to express their their negative feelings towards you. Lastly, if Isa converse appears in a reading when a specific circumstance is inquired about, and there is a choice that the querent might be facing, and the querent has a particular choice in mind and is inquiring about that choice, Isa converse might very strongly indicate that that choice, that the changes that it will bring, it will not have a positive, healthy benefit towards you or the situation in general, or the people that are involved with it. So it would not be, it could range from being just not beneficial to the querent, in the sense of it not having added anything of value or growth or whatever, to it potentially having disastrous results. So that's something you will have to decide based off of your intuition and based off of the surrounding runes as well as the context, as always. An example of converse Isa might be that, for example, a querent comes to you and they ask you, like, yeah, hey, I just had a horrible fight with a friend, or with a family member, or with my spouse, or whatever. Let's go with friend for now. This individual asks you about, like, hey, what are the consequences of this fight? How are they feeling? What can I do to fix things? And converse Isa might show up, and it might be about it might show up in the present or the issue slot, or even the challenge. It is likely that converse Isa will appear in this situation for a wide variety of reasons. Because the friend could bear the querent ill will as a result of the fight and what was said during the fight by both sides. it might also be an indication of, that if the friend came to the querent and was like, yeah, oh, hi, how you doing? Like being kind of standoffish, but not at the same time willing to, express that they are feeling something negative towards the querent. It might confirm for the client, for the querent, that the friend is actually feeling a lot more than they're letting on, and this might be part of the solution to the problem, to like get them to talk, get them to open up. So these are different meanings that this rune can have in converse. Lastly, converse Isa in a spiritual context to me. It is about spiritual deception, being led or leading yourself down a slippery slope, or a path that will not be to your benefit, that will inevitably result in basically you falling flat on your face because you slipped, tripped, and fell, without having gained any other valuable lesson from it, other than the lesson that you always need to be careful of who you believe, and where you walk, to watch where you walk. It is a warning to tell you that you should always beware that you are prepared and adequately equipped to handle a specific situation. Do your research, know what you're getting into, learn to research the people, the leaders of a certain religious path or a certain spiritual practice. Who are they like? What are they like? Who are they? What do the teachings of the religion stand for? Are there any doctrines that they're not showing the outside world that might be, harmful, but at the same time are concealed so that other people are not aware of it? So until you get deeper into their quote unquote mysteries or teachings, and then you suddenly find out certain things, and you're like, I kind of want nothing to do with this. Well, you might have done your research a little better, maybe even, of course, not. This is not always, knowable, because not all information about everything is out there, even with our current, information age going on. The internet does not, contrary to popular belief, hold all the answers about everything. So, in this case, the runes might actually, be of benefit to warn you of a particular path that you're going on. And I mean, you see this time and time again, and you hear this so many times in, all those stories of very inexperienced teenagers. They just, start dabbling with magic, with occult stuff, and they just, run into the first spell that they can get their hands on, and they have had no practice, no training. They don't know how to set up defenses. They don't know how to cleanse themselves. They don't know how to banish things. The right mindset to be in when you do these kinds of rituals and evocations and invocations. And they just, they do these things, and they recite a couple things, and they pull out the appropriate offerings, and, what have you. And it suddenly ends up being a pretty huge disaster. Like they either, like get attacked or accidentally, basically the results can be disastrous if you don't know what you're doing. So in such a case, Converse Isa will obviously be a guide in the sense that, like, if you do this, it's not going to be to your benefit. The only lesson you're going to learn here is that you probably shouldn't have done it before you, went through years of training, or, you at least gained a lot of experience. Such things, religion, spirituality, occultism, magic. These are all things that you shouldn't be taking lightly. You shouldn't just, go around flinging spells left and right. And you certainly just don't want to, dive into it without knowing what you're doing, because, you might be, thinking of, hey, I'm going to curse Johnny the neighbor because he was being excessively obnoxious yesterday. And you might end up, having that backfire and curse yourself instead, for example, So, it is not something to play around with simply because it seems cool or appealing or whatever. And, I mean, the same goes for religions or, certain spiritual paths. While there are undoubtedly benefits to each and every one of them in some way, shape, or form, the leaders of a certain cult or religion or spiritual path, they might have a very different agenda to what they're actually portraying on the outside. And that's why I said, do your research and get as much information out there as possible. And if you don't trust it, hey, there's plenty of sources that is not the internet that you can be asking. So basically, Converse Isa is in that sense to me a warning against taking too much on your plate, overworking yourself, overreaching, that kind of thing. And I mean, one of the beauties about life is that you never truly know whether you're ready for something. One of the beauties in life is that you never truly know if you're ready to move on to the next bigger step in what you might already be familiar with on some level. There is never 100% certainty, but it never hurts to be as prepared as possible, or as prepared as you can be before you start wanting to, reach out for more. And there's nothing wrong with, wanting to get better at things. There's nothing wrong with wanting to explore, with wanting to investigate, obviously. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from doing that. In fact, quite the opposite. But what I do feel this rune very strongly cautions in Converse is that we should always make sure that we do our research, that we always, have a backup plan, always have the basics down before we, start moving into a more advanced, or even the basic, if we don't have any experience, direction of something. And regardless, again, it doesn't really matter if it's a spiritual endeavor, if it's a mental endeavor. I mean, you wouldn't go into college and skip over to 101 of philosophy or psychology or sociology before taking a much more advanced class that is, that has to deal with these kinds of topics. The same with math or a language. You wouldn't take a class that was far beyond the capabilities of someone who hasn't even mastered the 101 yet. 101 usually being the basics, which is what you're watching right now, the basics of the runes. My descriptions that I'm given here are just skirting over the meaning of each rune and what they mean in divination and what they might mean on a spiritual level. And it is up to you to add on to that, to maybe even subtract from that, to develop your own meaning and understanding. And I keep repeating this in pretty much every video I make for a reason. So, it's not just limited to spiritual stuff or mental stuff or, physical stuff. It basically encompasses any and all things. So, I guess that concludes our rune video of this week. That was Isa, the Ice Rune. A relatively short video, as is usually the case with runes that don't have a reverse side, because obviously we would only be 2/3 of the way instead of entirely done. But yeah, next time we will be going to the rune Yira, which is the rune that, yeah, the last rune of the first half of the Elder Futhark. It is the 12th rune, and it is the rune of the harvest, which is actually quite fitting considering that it is the well, the 12th rune out of the 24, because it is about the end of one thing and more challenges ahead. So I will see you next time. Hail to you.